the vacuum left by John Roberts and the conservatives in the court, the grand bargain that we had, that John Lewis shed blood for, along with thousands and thousands of others. At the markup of the Senate bill today, Democrats tried to sound a warning about these anti-democratic bills Republicans are pushing across the country. While Republicans trotted out bad faith arguments, it's really the Democrats who are trying to game the system for their own benefit.
We are witnessing an attempt at the greatest contraction of voting rights since the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of Jim Crow. Republicans no longer want to let the voters pick their politicians. They want to let politicians pick their voters.
The truth is quite simple. Our democracy is not in crisis, and we aren't going to let one party take over our democracy under the false pretense of saving it.
Our democracy is not in crisis. I mean, yes, we did have a violent insurrection whipped up by the last president, the first attempt to stop the peaceful transfer of power in generations, possibly ever, depending on how you define it. But, you know, nothing to see here. And so now we're back to all this again. The pre-clearance bureaucracy, the Voting Rights Act, was erected precisely to solve this problem. The one they're fighting over now. Thank you, John Roberts. We are not going to take this power away from municipalities. That was the idea behind the Voting Rights Act. But we're going to have oversight and a check against attempts to lock voters out of the process. Now, the only way to deal with this is to create some sort of new federal standards. But Democrats need 60 votes to pass that kind of bill, unless they kill the filibuster. Republicans have made it clear they are all in on making it as hard as they can to vote. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar chairs the Senate Rules Committee, which conducted the markup. The Senate's For the People bill today, and she joins me now. How'd the markup go today, Senator?
Pretty good. Do remember, our goal was to at least get that even vote. What does that mean, Chris? We can bring that bill to the floor, Senator Schumer can. If we had lost a Democrat or hadn't gotten everyone on board, and the committee was incredible, including moderates like Angus King and Mark Warner, who are on our committee, then we wouldn't have been able to get it to the floor. But we all stuck together. We had a long, long markup, nearly 40 amendments. Senator Cruz dominated the day. And when you read that quote from Senator McConnell, or played it, I did keep thinking the same thing. Yeah, there's a crisis when you have an insurrection. There's a crisis when you have senators that basically said, oh, forget the electoral vote and believe the big lie. And there's a crisis when you've got voters standing in line in garbage bags and homemade masks like they did in Milwaukee, or people that aren't even able in Georgia now to get water if they've got a long line. Or when you basically say we're only going to have one drop box in a county of 5 million people, like happened in Texas last time, and that's Harris County. That would be like putting one drop box in the middle of my entire state. So that's why this bill is so important, to allow people to take back our democracy. And that means getting rid of the secret money. It means making sure there's anti-corruption provisions in place. And it, of course, means minimal national standards for voting.
Can I ask, I don't think you're going to love this question. I'm going to ask it anyway.
Oh, I can take anything.
Okay.
After today with Ted Cruz, come on.
It's true.
Go at it.
Okay. I'm going to take it as a challenge. I'm going to ask about Ted Cruz in a second. So I guess maybe it's just there's no path to it, but what the Supreme Court technically struck down. I mean, what I'm struck by in this whole fight is that we are having a fight over a problem we had solved. I mean, the Voting Rights Act literally solved this problem. Like, local administration of elections is important. It's a principle we generally have. There's reasons to have that. You need a federal check because it's been abused in the past. Is there a way of just restoring the pre-clearance formula in a way that the court will, like, could we just do that? It just seems like we're trying to reinvent the wheel here a little bit.
Okay, let's
that we have a solution to.
Let's step back. John Lewis Voting Rights Act, right? That's a separate bill that's in judiciary. That would go a long way toward restoring that. So that is such an important bill. But it still doesn't solve some of the problems of the dark money, right? That's why we have the Disclose Act. It doesn't solve the problems that we have, crazy situations where the Supreme Court of the United States has no ethics rules, even though Darrell Issa, I found out this week, did propose a bill that is similar to our bill to bring those in. And so the point is that you need both. You need to restore the Voting Rights Act with the John Lewis bill, and then you need this For the People Act, because it actually sets some minimum standards and would just make it a whole lot easier. Because I think one thing we've learned in the last decade, as the Fourth Circuit once said, these guys are discriminating with surgical precision against African Americans, and they will do anything. So new problems keep emerging, like purging voters from the list. I think my best quote on that is Stacey Abrams, when she said, you know what? When you don't go to a meeting for a while, you don't lose your right to assemble.
Right.
If you don't go to church or mosque or synagogue, you don't lose your right to religious liberty, and you shouldn't lose your right to vote.
I do want to play this exchange. I mean, Ted Cruz is one of 8 U.S. senators, if I'm recalling the number correctly, who voted to reject the electors, which essentially would have installed the loser, Donald Trump, over the winner, Joe Biden, in contravention of both the Electoral College and the national popular vote. And when you talked about this today, he did his signature go-to move, one that I've seen before when boarding on a plane on the way to Cancun amidst a weather crisis in Texas, which is to look at his phone. Take a look.
When in fact you, Senator Cruz, not all of your colleagues here today, you were contesting the Electoral College. You were leading, one of the leaders on the effort to say that the election results were not correct. And so you wonder why we want to make sure that people have the right to vote.
What was going on there?
Well, he made the claim that we didn't need to put these provisions in place, and he went back, of all ironies, to 2016 and claimed that somehow Hillary Clinton was contesting the election when, as you know, she conceded, the Electoral College operated properly, and we sure didn't have an insurrection like we did when he took the reins and claimed that the Electoral College wasn't accurate and that we couldn't count the people's votes. That's 2020. So I was making the comparison and then making the obvious argument that literally we had a group of white supremacists invade the Capitol, that people died, that we all remembered the splintered glass and the spray painting on the walls, and for now him to come and say, oh, hey, everything's okay. No, not everything's okay. And as I said on that inaugural stage, it is the moment where our democracy picks itself up, brushes itself off, and moves forward as we always do, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And how you do that is by making sure the people can retake their democracy and can vote. And if his party can adjust, as I said today, adjust their views on issues so they bring in more voters or adjust their messages or their candidates, they can't win by just taking away people's right to vote. That's what they're trying to do right now.
Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is chair of that Senate Rules Committee that had the markup today on Senate Bill 1. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
As justice correspondent for The Nation magazine, Elie Mystal has been closely following the Republican Party's anti-democratic push to suppress as many votes as possible, and he joins me now. I want to start on the Roberts Court and what the Supreme Court has wrought, because I just there's a sort of sense of like this whack-a-mole you're constantly playing. They're passing a bill in Texas, and they're passing one in Georgia, today in Arizona, and they're these small things, and again, they're at the margins. It's like these 100,000 voters in Arizona and this drop box in Texas, but it's precisely that infrastructure that we used to have at a federal level with civil servants and not politicians looking at it, which also cuts both ways, because if advocates are saying, well, this is horrible and will have disparate impact, and the civil servants say, no, actually, this is fine, like, that's also good. It's good to have someone dispassionately evaluate this stuff.
Look, your open was right, and your question to Senator Klobuchar was exactly right. This was wrought by John Roberts. The problem with everything happening in Congress today, everything happening in the Senate, the For the People Act, or the John Lewis Act, is that John Roberts is still there.
Right.
All right? Nothing has happened to make him go away.
Right.
Anthony Kennedy was part of the majority in Shelby County, joining Roberts in eviscerating the Voting Rights Act. Anthony Kennedy has been replaced by alleged attempted rapist Brett Kavanaugh. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who opposed John Roberts' decision in Shelby County, has been replaced by Amy Coney Barrett. I cannot count to 5. I cannot count to 5 votes on the Supreme Court that would uphold anything that gets passed by this Congress to secure the Voting Rights Act. So I don't know what we're doing. If we're not expanding the court, if we're not aggressively reforming the court. We are doing nothing to protect voting rights because John Roberts and now 6 conservatives can destroy whatever Congress passes out of this Congress just as easily as they destroyed the initial voting rights.
It's such a good point. I mean, it's a pressing one, so like don't change the channel. Stay with us here. But it points to. I mean, you're totally right. Like John Roberts is sitting there. Like I went to on a date with my wife in an indoor restaurant. And he's sitting there like I was like watching the oysters come over. Like he's sitting watching like Senate Bill 1. Like bring it right here. I know what to do with that bill. So you're totally right about that. I mean, it speaks in some ways to the profundity of the Democratic stakes here, because again, all this stuff is like these small whittling attacks at the margins. It's 100,000 votes here, but the animating spirit of it harkens back to the original sin of the country and its worst authoritarian impulses. And like, we have to do some deep work to keep democracy going right now in a bunch of different directions.
This is the battle that we're always fighting, right? There are, as I count them, 4 amendments to the Constitution trying to get over our original sin of having a democracy where only rich white people could vote, right? We have the 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment, the 24th Amendment, which eliminated the poll tax, the 26th Amendment, which dropped the voting age to 18. I could throw in the 17th Amendment, which made popular elections to the senators possible. So that's 4 to 5 amendments trying to expand the franchise. Who's been against them at every point? Conservatives. Whether those conservatives called themselves Democrats in the 1860s, whether they call themselves Republicans today, whether they call themselves Democrats from West Virginia today, conservatives are the ones who are against expanding the franchise. Why? Because when everybody votes, conservatives can't win. That's just, they know it, I know it, everybody knows it. When everybody votes and everybody's vote is counted, the current Conservative Party, as it is currently constituted, cannot win. So they're not playing chess, right? They're not trying to like arrange the white pieces so they can outflank the black pieces. They are trying to throw the black pieces off the board and say checkmate.
Right.
Like that's their actual political strategy. And it has worked at various times in our country's history very well.
Yeah, and that point about, I mean, the point about the Voting Rights Act and the 15th Amendment is a reminder of exactly the same issue here. Like, we had the 15th Amendment. It was quite clear. You want to talk about intent. Like, it was quite clear that what happened afterwards was not okay, and yet it happened again. We have to pass the Voting Rights Act to get back to the square one of essentially Reconstruction-era enfranchisement, multiracial enfranchisement in the South. The battle continues now. We saw it on display in the Senate today. Elie Mystal, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
We're on the eve of a pretty big moment for the two-party system and the future of our democracy. Tomorrow, the Republican Party is going to vote to remove Liz Cheney from her leadership position because basically she refuses to peddle Donald Trump's big lie that the election was stolen, that he was the rightful winner. Tonight, a pretty remarkable moment, Liz Cheney took to the floor of the House to say her piece before the vote. This literally just happened. We will show it to you next. The vote is set and the message has been sent. House Republicans are going to try and pull off their purge of Congresswoman Liz Cheney of Wyoming from leadership tomorrow for the simple sin of telling the truth, for refusing to be part of the big lie. The vote is likely to be done by secret ballot or by voice vote and decided by a simple majority. Now, tonight, Congresswoman Cheney took to the House floor on the eve of the vote to address what is happening.
Today, we face a threat America has never seen before. A former president who provoked a violent attack on this Capitol in an effort to steal the election has resumed his aggressive effort to convince Americans that the election was stolen from him. He risks inciting further violence. Millions of Americans have been misled by the former president. They have heard only his words, but not the truth, as he continues to undermine our democratic process, sowing seeds of doubt about whether democracy really works at all. I am a conservative Republican, and the most conservative of conservative principles is reverence for the rule of law. The Electoral College has voted. More than 60 state and federal courts, including multiple judges the former president appointed, have rejected his claims. The Trump Department of Justice investigated the former president's claims of widespread fraud and found no evidence to support them. The election is over. That is the rule of law. That is our constitutional process.
Mona Charen is a policy editor of The Bulwark. Olivia Troy is a former advisor of Vice President Mike Pence, a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force until she left last summer. Mona, I'll start with you. Aside from one sentence, which we can get to in a second, that the highest conservative principles of defense of the rule of law, take out that one sentence. Everything there, as just factual claims about what's happening, is essentially indisputable. It's just the plain truth of what's happening. That, like, we all know, and that is the thing that you're not allowed to say.
That's exactly it. This is a war on truth that is now being joined by, or apparently about to be joined by, the entire Republican conference. And it really raises questions about how capable this country is of sustaining democracy, because it's really hard to overstate what this says about the state of the Republican Party. They are saying that Liz Cheney is unacceptable because she will not bend to the big lie. And if that's not acceptable, if that's the stand the party is now lashing itself to, then any lie in the service of Republicans is going to be demanded, right? And so I raised in my column the question, what happens, and bear in mind, I was a Republican for 40 years, but what happens if the Republicans take the House, as is likely in 2022, and then are called upon in 2024 to certify an election at the Electoral College? Will it be expected that any Republican in good standing will lie? It appears so.
Yeah, I've been very focused on that point, and I liked your column for that reason, which is that January 6, 2025 will feature literally the same thing. We just do, we do it. It's usually just a vote, procedural, essentially, administrative vote. And if it becomes the case
don't forget that, sorry to interrupt you, but don't forget that in 2020, Mike Pence, who in other respects has been invertebrate, nevertheless, he did his constitutional duty. Brad Raffensperger did his duty. None of the states that Trump won sent separate delegates of electors to the Congress in violation of the votes of the people. None of that happened in 2020. But the party, by endorsing Trump's lies and his fantasy about the big lie about the election, are really throwing into doubt whether in 2024 those same standards would be upheld.
Olivia, Mona just brought up Mike Pence, and I keep thinking, like, what does Mike Pence of the Hang Mike Pence chant think about all this? Mike Pence of the man who Donald Trump painted a target on the back of, who Donald Trump, after the Capitol had been breached, tweeted about, that the crowd was there to, I don't know, I mean, according to their words, hang Mike Pence. What does he think about all this?
Well, apparently, Chris, he thinks nothing. He's been silent. He hasn't taken a stand. He hasn't spoken out trying to defend our democracy like Liz Cheney is. Because clearly he's known Liz Cheney for a very long time in the Cheney family. They're true conservatives, and depending on how you define the word. But I will say, when you're not standing with Liz Cheney at this moment and doing everything you can to defend her for what she's doing in defense of the truth in our democracy, you have failed Americans, because you're not just failing the Republican Party at this point. You truly are failing our society, because what is happening right now will have consequences. They are subverting the truth, and they will continue to do this over and over again.
Yeah, I think, Mona, because I was raised Catholic, although not the most faithful Catholic these days, but I can't help but see this in these sort of terms of sin and temptation, and so this sort of, the kind of moral compromise. I mean, it's like Stefanik's telling herself, well, I'll just do this and I'll get a little more power. And these lies, these things people are telling themselves about, I can make do with Donald Trump, and he brings new voters into the party. It will lead to ruin. It already did. This is the thing that's so crazy. Those of us who were screaming our heads off for months running into the election, saying, look what he's doing. This is horrible for democracy. And then after the election saying, look what he's doing. And it culminates on national television on January 6th. I feel like I've lost my mind for anyone to be like, well, what's the big deal? It's like, this is exactly what we warned you about.
Well, exactly. I mean, it really, look, I mean, so many aspects of the last 5 years have made people like you and me feel like we're taking crazy pills, right? I mean, it is insane that there wasn't a national revulsion by everybody up and down the line about January 6th. The initial response, don't forget, in the first hours after that atrocity, everybody behaved normally, right? Lindsey Graham said, okay, I'm done. Kevin McCarthy was very, very strong in saying that Trump had responsibility for this. He called it into being and so on and so forth. And then within 48 hours, their spinelessness returned. And it's just, I mean, it is just so dismaying that those antibodies that used to be a natural part of every decent American, and I think that was all the overwhelming majority, the antibodies against this kind of totalitarian temptation, if you will, were very strong, and they have become eroded in an unbelievably short amount of time.
Mona Charen and Olivia Troy, thank you both for making time tonight. I really, really appreciate it. After the violent insurrection on January 6th, just as Mona was saying, everyone a lot of people reacted normally, right, with horror and revulsion. Among the institutions that did, corporate America appeared to distance themselves from the nearly 150 Republicans who voted to overturn the presidential election results. The memories are short. And so 4 months later, Republicans are attempting to erase the memory of January 6th and help corporations who have interests they want to push, of course, figure out how they can get back to donating. Independent reporter Judd Legum has discovered the trade organization for these corporate PACs has been encouraging its membership to move beyond January 6th and resume their political contributions. Legum obtained a webinar video from early March featuring a Republican operative named Michael Duhame, essentially coaching representatives of these corporate PACs on how to restart their donations.
Ultimately, you just have to do what's right for your organization and deal with the fallout that comes from it, because most likely it's going to be a one-day story. Most likely you're not going to lose customer share over it, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't be cognizant of it and be aware of it.
We reached out to Mr. Duhame there about that webinar, and he sent along the following statement. He says, anyone who follows me knows I have been critical of members of the Republican Party who voted against certifying the election results. I've strongly condemned the attack on our democracy. Any insinuation to the contrary is disproven easily. I do believe we need everyone in both parties to stay engaged in the political process, because that is the best way to move our country forward. Stay engaged. That was a message I was conveying at the virtual meeting. I leave it to others to look at all my comments since the election in November and also since January 6th and judge whether this seminar is presented in proper context. Judd Legum is a reporter who broke this story. He's the author of Popular Information, which is a newsletter about politics and power. Judd, first, can you give us a little context about what this webinar event was, who the group is that's hosting it, and what the point of it was?
Well, this is a group, the National Association of Business PACs, that's actually the trade association for corporate PACs. And they hold different seminars. And in March, this seminar featuring Michael Duhame was titled, Where Do We Go From Here? And the purpose of it was many of these companies had pledged to suspend their donations either to all politicians, all members of Congress, or just the 147. And this group, which you call NABPAC, it has its initials spell out, was trying to help them work through how to restart those donations. And if you listen to the webinar, which is about 40 minutes long, the clear message was that corporations should begin to restart their donations to the members of Congress that voted to overturn the election. And that's what Mr. Duhame, who is a crisis communications consultant, a Republican operative, was taking them through. It's only going to be a one-day story. Here's how you should do it. Set up a murder board with different communications professionals and sort of lob the tough questions about why you're giving to insurrectionists. and just get prepared and then take your lumps and let's move forward.
I mean, I should point out that Michael Duhame is someone who, has a public profile and has not been a particularly Trumpy Republican in his public profile, and has been, as he noted, quite critical of January 6th and critical of Trump and all this stuff. But to me, this is just an example of precisely like the gravitational pull here, which is like, everyone had seizures of conscience. They were horrified by what they saw, and I think public opinion also pushed them in that direction. But it doesn't matter in the long run. Like, business is business. They're going to get back to it.
Yeah, and I think that's where Duhame was coming from in this webinar. It wasn't a Trump fest. There wasn't a lot of talk about how the election was stolen. It was about the necessity of getting these contributions started and how to prioritize the bottom line of your business. And he was very direct that these contributions are the way that corporations get access to politicians, and encourage them. He said that that's a good reason you can continue to do that, but because of this new environment, you're going to have to, for public consumption, come up with a pretext, a better reason to tell the public of why you're resuming to these politics.
He says at one point, it's a perfectly good reason to say you're donating to these legislators because they have power over you. But you can't say that out loud. But of course, he's right insofar as that is the reason, right? This access relationship and wanting to sort of grease the wheels of regulatory decisions is precisely what's going on with all these PACs.
Yeah, and I think there was a moment in time, and we're actually still in that moment, where corporations said, this may not be in our financial interest, but what happened on January 6th was so outside the bounds of what we can tolerate that we're going to put that aside. And if you looked at the first quarter donations, for the most part, there were exceptions, but for the most part, corporations withheld that money. But now is really a test, and there's a push and pull. Are corporations going to stick to that, or are we going to go back to business as usual? And that's what this webinar was really about.
Judd Legum, great reporting. Very well done. Thanks for making time for us tonight.
Thanks, Chris.
Still ahead, former National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes, New York City mayoral candidate Andrew Yang put out a statement about the latest violence between Israelis and Palestinians, which read, quote, "I'm standing with the people of Israel who are coming under bombardment attacks and condemn the Hamas terrorists. People in New York City will always stand with our brothers and sisters in Israel who face down terrorism and persevere." Hamas has been firing rockets indiscriminately into Israel proper for 3 days, the first such barrage of this magnitude in 7 years. There's actually a U.S.-funded air defense system called Iron Dome, which has managed to intercept most of them, though today the barrage has killed at least 3 people and forced Israel to temporarily close Ben Gurion Airport. Now, the kind of statement from Andrew Yang is not at all unusual in New York City politics or Democratic politics or American politics. But, as many pointed out in response, his statement wholly omits that just the day before, Israel began airstrikes in Gaza that killed at least 30 Palestinians, including 10 children, and wounding over 200 people, according to Palestinian officials there. Yang's statement also omitted this entire episode's proximate trigger is an attempt by Israeli settlers with the backing of the Israeli government to evict Palestinian families from their homes in the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. This is a cause long pursued by Israeli factions who believe that all of Jerusalem should be brought under Israeli control, including the parts in the east, which are not officially part of Israel proper. What happened after Andrew Yang's tweet was especially interesting. Yang was approvingly retweeted by Trump figures like Stephen Miller, who said, quote, "Andrew Yang is exactly right. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is outrageously wrong." He got a big thumbs up from Senator Ted Cruz, who said, "Bravo to Yang for opposing the rabidly pro-Hamas and anti-Israel attacks from fellow Democrats Omar and Tlaib." Both they and others using the opportunity to explicitly attack Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. But here's the thing, the politics here are shifting quickly, both in the region, where Israel, of course, has normalized relations with a number of Arab countries in just the last few years, and here in the U.S., where the Democratic Party has a growing fissure over this very issue. So far, nearly 20 Democrats in the Senate and the House have issued statements condemning strategic communications and speechwriting, and Ben Rhodes joins me now. Ben, I first want to start. I mean, things are bad right now. They are escalating. There's real concern. UN the UN envoy for Middle East peace talked about the concern of full-scale war. What is your reaction to what we are seeing right now and what the Biden administration can do?
Well, it's a horrifying situation. It's a worst-case scenario of escalation, Chris, where you had this kind of systematic effort to remove the Palestinians from East Jerusalem. You had these attacks, really, or operations against worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque during the holy month of Ramadan for Muslims. Then you have Hamas, a terrorist organization, firing these indiscriminate rockets in Israel. And now we see the escalation where Israel comes in very heavy-handed. They're blowing up apartment blocks where civilians live. The Biden administration is going to have to get involved. The two Gaza wars in 2008 and then in 2012, during Obama's tenure, it took the United States getting involved to try to push a ceasefire here. I think the Biden team was reluctant to get involved in the Middle East because there's not a lot of prospect for peace. But ultimately, unless the U.S. steps in here, this situation can get even further out of control.
How have things changed? I mean, what did you learn about handling this portfolio and the U.S.'s relationship to Israel and to the Palestinian territories? And what do you learn from your time, the Obama administration, in navigating that? What surprised you?
Well, I mean, Chris, I'm just going to be honest here. I mean, what I learned is that the old talking points don't work anymore. We're accustomed to U.S. officials, people like me, going out and talking about our commitment to a two-state solution, a secure Israel next to an independent Palestine. But the reality is the facts on the ground have changed overwhelmingly in the last decade or two, to the point where a Palestinian state is almost impossible, a viable, contiguous Palestinian state. The Israeli government under Bibi Netanyahu has moved further and further to the right and is not interested in peace. And he himself has said that he doesn't want there to be a Palestinian state on his watch. And I think what a lot of progressives in the Democratic Party are responding to is the fact that the old talking points don't apply to this circumstance anymore. There's such a vast asymmetry of power between Israel and the Palestinians that people are saying, hey, wait a minute here. Obviously, we condemn Hamas and its indiscriminate rocket fire. Hamas doesn't represent all Palestinians. And frankly, the Palestinian people are increasingly in a dire circumstance. And I think that's opening up fissures in the Democratic Party at the same time that the Republican Party, in part because of the evangelical support for Israel, has become even more in lockstep with the right wing of the Israeli political system.
Yeah, it's interesting because Israel, guns used to be this way and that it didn't sort of break down on partisan polarizing lines. And Israel has often not been. And it's been a great triumph of various institutions, AIPAC among others, to sort of create this kind of bipartisan consensus, a relationship between the Israeli government and the U.S. government as a sort of bilateral relationship that went through administrations, Democrat or Republican. American politics are polarizing very intensely. Former Israeli Ambassador Ron Dermer had this to say recently, which I thought was fascinating. We talked about what the backbone of American political domestic support for Israel is. Take a listen to what he said.
People have to understand the backbone of Israel's support in the United States is the evangelical Christians. That's the backbone. And it's true because of numbers and also because of their passionate and unequivocal support for Israel. Look at numbers. About 25%, and some people think more, 25% of Americans are evangelical Christians. Less than 2% of Americans are Jews. If you look just at numbers, you should be spending a lot more time doing outreach to evangelical Christians, than you would do to Jews.
I think, Ben, that points to something you were saying, and it also, the sort of the flip side of that are fissures within the large American Jewish population, folks that are Orthodox, who are secular, who are liberal, who are conservative, on an issue that I think used to be more uniting than it is now.
No, absolutely. I think what Netanyahu, advised by people like Ron Dermer, has done is decided that we can do what we need to do with the support uniformly of the Republican Party and some Democratic support. And if there's a divide in the Democratic Party, if there's a divide even in the American Jewish community where there are raucous debates about these issues, that's okay. I think that puts at risk the kind of bipartisan long-term support for Israel in the United States. I think younger Democrats are raising more and more questions. And look, Chris, the reality is the Palestinians, the millions of Palestinians who live in the area that is either governed or occupied by Israel, they are there. And if there's not a two-state solution, what is the solution here? Is it a one-state situation where Palestinians have equal rights? Is it a situation where the Palestinians are increasingly driven out of their homes? Is it some situation in which the Palestinians are second-class citizens? There are not good answers to these questions right now. from the Israeli government led by Prime Minister Netanyahu and from a lot of his supporters in the United States. And that's why I think people in the United States who care about structural injustice, who care about human rights, in the United States and Israel and other countries around the world, it's not singling Israel out. It's I think, a uniform progressive agenda of asking hard questions about, hey, wait a second here. What are we supporting in terms of policies that are not only not bringing peace, but continue to bring about these kinds of escalations that we see?
Ben Rhodes, it's always great to talk to you. Thanks for making time tonight.
Thanks, Chris.
Next up, Dr. Peter Hotez on the big vaccine news today and what it means for this summer after this.